We've all encountered that one person who somehow always seems to manage a relationship on their own terms, no matter the distance or emotional labor they require from others. But what drives this dynamic of dependence and control, where emotional unavailability becomes a strategic lever to wield power and influence over loved ones? If you've ever felt like you're constantly walking on eggshells, desperate to be accepted or validated by someone who barely acknowledges your emotions, then you know the feeling of being trapped in this cycle of insecurity. In this video, we'll delve into the unseen game of validation and insecurity, laying bare the complex psychological mechanisms that govern this subtle yet destructive pattern in relationships. Here are 6 insightful spoken sentences that fit the tone and section of your long-form video. Behind the mask of aloofness lies an ocean of self-doubt, where true insecurities are so deeply buried that they are hidden even from the person wearing them. When someone consistently checks out, they are often desperately seeking reassurance that their worth is not entirely dependent on their partner's approval. The need for control in an insecure person is rooted in an overwhelming fear of being controlled, yet they paradoxically leverage emotional unavailability as a manipulative means to hold power. In relationships, genuine emotional unavailability is often a thinly veiled disguise for an overactive ego, whose primary concern is maintaining its own sense of self-importance. What starts out as a carefully crafted image to protect against emotional vulnerability can quickly escalate into a self-perpetuating cycle of emotional unavailability, as the individual becomes trapped in their own web of deception, unable to admit their genuine feelings. Attraction, in fact, stems from the thrill of potentially uncovering the person behind the mask, rather than actual connection. We're so accustomed to seeking validation from others that we've become adept at recognizing the subtle cues of approval, the gentle whispers of validation that fuel our insecurities. But we often overlook the underlying mechanics of the game itself, the way our desires for validation subtly manipulate our choices, our relationships, our very sense of self. When we're searching for validation, we're essentially asking others to complete a piece of ourselves that we've been missing, to fill the void within, but what we're really doing is investing power and control in people who are often uncertain of their own identities, unsure of how to fulfill our needs, and so we find ourselves caught in a never-ending cycle of craving and dissatisfaction. The pursuit of validation is a masterclass in self-deception. We convince ourselves that our self-worth is tied to external sources, that our happiness depends on the validation of others, when in reality, it's just a thinly veiled attempt to avoid the fear of not being enough, of not being loved, of being alone. In our quest for validation, we often end up attracting individuals who are adept at manipulating our insecurities, who use our fears to leverage power and control in the relationship, creating an environment where we feel compelled to prove our worth, to constantly earn love and acceptance. We've been conditioned to believe that validation is a form of love, that it's a fundamental human need, but what we've really been taught is to seek external validation as a substitute for self-love and self-acceptance, and in doing so, we're perpetuating a culture of insecurity, a never-ending cycle of craving and dissatisfaction that keeps us trapped in this endless game of validation. When we give in to the demands of someone who consistently pulls emotional unavailability, we're not just playing along, we're being programmed to perpetuate our own need for validation. Deep down, people often crave a sense of power over others because it helps mask their own feelings of insecurity, especially when it comes to intimacy and emotional exposure. The art of emotional unavailability is often built on a foundation of self-deception, where individuals convince themselves that they are actually the ones calling the shots, when in reality, they are merely controlling their own emotional withdrawal. Insecurities and fears of abandonment often drive people to create unhealthy dynamics in relationships, using emotional manipulation as a means to validate their own sense of worth. What's truly fascinating about the game of emotional unavailability is that it often relies on the thrill of attraction, but beneath this facade lies a desperate need for control and a fear of being controlled themselves. When individuals prioritize their own sense of ego and identity above genuine emotional intimacy, they are essentially creating a self-contained universe where love and validation are doled out only on their own terms, leaving others perpetually unsatisfied and seeking validation. In our quest for connection, we often find ourselves playing a desperate game of validation, where the true motive is less about mutual understanding and more about securing our own insecurities. People who are emotionally unavailable tend to have a heightened sense of self-importance, often using this facade as a shield to conceal their deep-seated need for validation and control. We're drawn to individuals who seem confident and unattainable, not because of their confidence, but because their unavailability represents a validation of our own worth, no matter how fleeting or illusory it may be. Their emotional unavailability serves as a subtle yet potent form of psychological manipulation, where we become trapped in a cycle of self-doubt and anxiety, constantly seeking reassurance from someone who is systematically unavailable to provide it. This is where the true power dynamics lie, not in the grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in the insidious ways our insecurities are exploited, often beneath the surface of our conscious awareness. Ultimately, our tendency to be drawn to emotionally unavailable partners stems from our collective fear of intimacy and a deep-seated insecurity that we're not worthy of unconditional love and acceptance. When we crave validation from someone else, we often unwittingly play into their hands, creating an unequal dynamic that's as damaging as it is insidious. The most toxic relationships aren't those that openly manipulate and exploit, but those that masquerade as symbiotic, yet secretly feed off our insecurities and emotional unavailability. In the game of validation and insecurity, we're often driven by a misguided need for love, but what we truly crave is the reassurance that we're worthy enough to be loved. Love can become a double-edged sword, where our desire for connection and intimacy is exploited by others who feed on our fear of abandonment and rejection. In relationships where emotional unavailability is used as a means of control, we're often led to believe that our love and devotion can be bought with the currency of our self-worth, rather than recognizing that true intimacy and love require mutual surrender and vulnerability. As we navigate these complex dynamics, it's crucial to recognize that our attraction to someone who's emotionally unavailable is often rooted in our deeper fear of being powerless and unlovable, rather than in any genuine desire for connection or partnership. Thank you for joining me on this journey to expose the unseen game of validation and insecurity. Remember, recognizing the subtle signs of emotional unavailability can be the first step towards reclaiming your emotional power and cultivating genuine connections in your relationships. If this content struck a chord, like, comment with your observations, and subscribe to stay tuned for more in-depth explorations of human psychology and relationship dynamics.